Hello, and thank you for joining this informational webinar on the Rural Housing Assessment Grant Program. Just as a reminder, we are going to be recording today's webinar and it will be posted on the website for the duration of the application period. Today, we're going to be talking about the timeline for the grant application, as well as a program overview, and finally, the scoring rubric and application questions, so you can see how they directly align with each other and have a better understanding of how the review panel will be looking at your application. Finally, at the end, we will have an opportunity for you to ask any questions. If you have questions during the presentation, please drop them in the chat. And then at the end, we will either use the chat or you're welcome to unmute yourself to ask your questions. So first, the application is currently open and available on iowagrants.gov. It closes at 11:59 p.m. on September 1st. The funding notification decisions will be emailed out on September 30th or before. During that month is when the review panel will be reviewing the applications and scoring them. And then the funding period starts on October 1st and runs through June 30th of 2024. Those of you that might be familiar with the Center for Rural Revitalization grants know that this is a little bit of a different timeframe than we've had in the past. We're really working to make sure that we have the longest timeframe possible for grantees to be able to complete their projects. So we bumped up some of the application deadlines this year and hope that that works better. So for the program overview, this is the fourth year, I believe, of this program. And the Rural Housing Assessment Grant Program, the name actually is not exactly the goal or the intent of the program. Rather than this grant program really funding straight up housing assessments, it more is focused on the interpretation and implementation of housing data. So as part of that, we really aim to support communities utilizing and understanding the information that is publicly available for free on the Profile of Iowa tool, which is available through IFA and breaks down into individual communities. I'll show a snapshot on the next screen, but invite you to go check out this website if you haven't in the past to kind of see the information that is available on there. It's all demographics, not just housing, and it's really fairly robust. So this program, the grant is supporting the information of this, as well as partnering with ISU Extension and Outreach on their rural housing readiness assessment process. So first, there is the data. And here is a snapshot of just what it can look like for one community as far as single family permits. And then with that information, working with ISU, they work with each community, each grantee through a series of community meetings, housing committee meetings, to kind of have a better understanding of the current environment of that community specifically. So they look at specific housing data, they look at any other information you have available, other housing incentives, codes, plans that you have created, all of those pieces that are really part of your housing narrative currently, to understand where those gaps are and where the needs are, and to really help develop a plan forward. Then the funds from this grant can help with kind of that next step, that first implementation step. So it is a kind of two-part grant program. So typically we have where communities will work with ISU Extension, receive that kind of housing plan, implementation plan at the end. And then from there, they have $10,000 to leverage towards those first steps. And communities have used that in a variety of ways that I will get into further. I have another link here and I'll show a screenshot of ISU's Extension and Outreach webpage. And I would highly recommend, if you are interested in this program, to reach out to them and get more information about kind of what that looks like, what they facilitate, examples from other communities, and kind of how they think that your community would be a good fit with their program. So I may have somewhat mentioned the grant request. This is a flat $10,000 grant per city or county partnering on the application. So another caveat, we actually changed the admin rules last year to open it up to if there are multiple communities that are coming together, have a regional approach. By working with ISU partners and understanding kind of how that partnership will work, there is the potential that we could have 10,000 per community if it's a multi-community entity. So far, however, in the past few years, we have only done one community at a time. So the community receives $10,000. They are required to have a $5,000 cash match. The way we like to look at kind of that breakdown of funding is if you have a total pot then of 15,000, 5,000 of it does go directly to ISU Extension and Outreach for their facilitation process. But then the remaining 10,000 can be utilized in different ways. Primarily, we have seen communities utilize it for implementation of the direct outcomes from that process with ISU Extension and Outreach. There is alternatively an option where if there is additional data or capacity needed by a community, they are able to utilize those additional 10,000 to work with an outside contractor of your choice. So there's kind of a few different ways that communities can go about it, but we primarily have seen using it for implementation of those initial first steps towards their housing goals. As far as the expenses, they must all be within the contract period. So any kind of pre-work you do with a consultant or agency or something, that funding cannot go towards your match. It needs to have been spent within the contract period. The reporting requirements for this grant include quarterly reports. The first quarterly report for this program will be in January of 2023, and that will cover the timeframe from October to December of 2022. Even if there has not been a lot of progress, this quarterly report is intended to just be a touch base. You know, we have had maybe one facilitation meeting in this time frame. The next are on the books for the spring or something like that is totally fine. We just want to make sure that things are progressing and that we haven't hit any roadblocks and don't anticipate a change in scope of work or difficulties hitting that contract deadline. The final report is a little bit more robust. That is where you will actually be uploading your report from ISU, also sharing how you utilize the remaining funds. You will put in there if there are any funds that you were not able to utilize, also any photos, if applicable, news clippings, things like that can be included in that final report. All of the reports are on iowagrants.gov. And if you are submitting a reimbursement claim, you still need to do a quarterly report. So the reimbursement claims, that is how this program works. So you will need to be making your payments up front. The reimbursements, as long as it's a minimum of a $1,000 claim, so that would be a minimum of a $1,500 documentation. So 500 of match, 1,000 of claim. With that claim, you'll need to include an invoice, so what the money went towards, and then proof of payment. So that can either be a canceled check or it could be a receipt, anything like that. And then just a quick status report of kind of how that progressed your project forward. Eligibility requirements, our population requirements are the same across all grant programs for the Center for Rural Revitalization. So that is that the program or project must exist in and benefit a city in Iowa with a population of 20,000 or fewer, and not contiguous to a city with a population of 40,000 or greater. Also, if it is a countywide project, then it must be one of the 88 least populous counties in Iowa. The applicants for this project are limited to city or county government or a federally recognized tribal government that is in Iowa. As far as our eligible project checklist, it pretty much checks off all the things that I've already talked about. So, making sure that you have that cash match, that you have your potential sources for funding, although that is something that I'll get into a little bit more as we talk about our budget. And agreement to contract with ISU Extension and Outreach is probably the biggest piece of this, to make sure that you are aware of that is our partner in this process. Additionally, if you do plan to partner with an outside contractor, and this will be relevant in some of the application questions as well, you must identify who that is and share with us the deliverables that are expected from them. Most consultants would be easily able to give you this information, and it should have been part of your initial agreement contract. So if you have any questions about that, either ask them at the end of this webinar, or we're able to chat offline about that. The use of funds I have talked about already a little, but essentially the dollars that do not go towards ISU Extension and Outreach, so the remaining kind of 10,000, can be utilized either on implementation of direct outcomes from that report, or on information gathering that is necessary in order to have a full picture of your housing situation. A housing committee is a really big piece of this process. It is something that ISU Extension and Outreach sees as a kind of critical element of their facilitation process, is to have this housing committee developed. We have found over the past few years that sometimes the housing committee that is included in the application ends up needing to be tweaked a little. So we have softened our requirements in the application for this, but it's still a requirement to include some kind of housing committee, just with the understanding where once you have started working with ISU, they might request the addition of some additional partners to help create kind of that full picture with all parties involved. So the application and scoring rubric we'll talk about a little bit now. The application, as I mentioned, is on Iowa Grants and is currently open. You must submit on Iowa Grants. I will say, if you do not currently have an account through them, I would highly recommend going and creating one, even if you're not sure if you're going to apply. I say that because it can take up to 72 hours for your account to be approved for you to even be able to open an application. And that is not something that I control. So just get that started, have it open, and then you can even decide at a later date if you want to start an application. We do have two pieces of extra consideration as an addition to the scoring rubric. One of those is an Iowa Great Places Citizens Advisory Board endorsed project. That adds an additional 5 points. Iowa Great Places are designation areas. And then on top of that, the project itself needs to be endorsed by the advisory board. So what that has looked like in the past is, if one of the projects related to an Iowa Great Place is associated with housing, or the addition of housing, or the development of housing, those projects, those communities would receive an additional 5 points. And then finally, projects located in a community of 5,000 or fewer receive an additional 5 points. Keep in mind, as we are going to be going through this rubric, that the rubric is included in the guidelines on the website. So really keep that handy as you are working through your application. That will help you understand what the review panel will be looking at and considering. So first, we start with the applicant profile. And this essentially is just talking a little bit about how the community, and since this is government, it's a little more obvious, but just share how the community is serving its target population, including, if housing is a priority, what you're doing with housing right now, and why you're initiating this study. Finally, timing and need. This is probably the section that is most significant for this application. And that's just to really show the true commitment this community, the applicant community, has to this process. So it's important to really kind of clearly explain why you think that there is a housing need, why you think that this process will be helpful to your community, who's at the table, not as far as listing, that's the next question, but kind of the processes that have been in the works that you think that this grant and this timing is the best for you. Then we have the housing committee. As I mentioned, it is important to have a very well-rounded. We are not looking for a housing committee made up of only city staff and the mayor. While it would be great to have the mayor and a city staff person on, we also want to see real estate, local businesses, any major employers, if there's a hospital in town or a university or something like that, have them there as well. Foundations, local council of government, all of those would be important people to have at the table. And then finally, existing documentation is also a really important piece of this application. And it's not to say that if you don't have some of this, that your community is not going to be a good fit. Sometimes those communities that know they don't have this and they need it are a good fit for this program. So it's really just about doing the work to make sure that you are sharing everything that is currently available. And the documentation here, some of it is not exhaustive. So if you have other plans or initiatives or any kind of information that you think is relevant and you think the review panel should be aware of that you have that is not over 20 years old, please include it. You can drop it here, or there is a supplemental information area where you can upload additional media. Implementation, we have this question on here, honestly, because it's important for the applicant to indicate that they understand the constraints, the time constraints of this project. However, we also understand that most applicants do not necessarily know what their implementation project is going to be, and that's fine. So with this, if the plan is for the community to not utilize the funds for, any additional information gathering, that type of thing, but instead for implementation, which is what a majority do, just put in your implementation that all the funds will be spent by June 30th of 2024, and that the project will be one of the outcomes from the ISU extension and outreach facilitation process. That's fine. We understand that this program is a little different and you don't necessarily know what your project is going to be in order to give those very clear implementation steps. This is the section where if you know you will be working with another entity, you can put it here. We have had in the past communities work with an outside consultant to be the actual kind of program manager. So they are the ones that applied, they help with correspondence, they help with management reporting, they also help to organize the meetings. So they ended up receiving quite a bit of the additional funds to help with the process part of this program. So that applicant needed to upload that information, the information for that entity. So if you are not planning to do that, if the city or the county government will be the kind of sole organization responsible for the data collection, implementation piece of it, then this is just not applicable to you. And you don't need to, I think you do have to put something, but you can put not applicable. Community partnerships. This is just any additional pieces that are involved. So if there are any maybe existing organizations that are at the table, any kind of key partners that are part of this process, and it can be a little duplicative of some of the housing committee discussion, but not necessarily always. So if there are partners that are helping financially with housing initiatives, with maybe they were the ones that provided the match, include those pieces here. Budget, this piece is fairly straightforward. So the requested amount is 10,000, and that is across the board because we kind of use a template. You have to enter in that 10,000, but it is a flat grant award of 10,000 for this one. Cash match is 5,000. If you have additional match that you are planning to be part of implementation, you are welcome to put that there, but the minimum is 5,000. Supplemental project cost, that's anything that is either outside the contract period, so it would not count towards match or grant, or anything in kind can be put there. If you don't have any, you can put 0, and then the total is just the sum of the 3. Finally, the budget local support is the source of the matching funds and the use of funds. So the source can be anything, but the stronger scoring section will be those that have local match. So we're looking at city or local government is the most common. We have received some applications where it's maybe a foundation, a local nonprofit, someone who is involved in the housing efforts can also be supplying that match. It is eligible to have match that is regional, state, or federal, but that would not receive the same strength of points as if it is local. Finally, the use of funds. Again, this one is a little weird because of this program. So the use of funds clearly need to depict that 5,000 will be going to ISU Extension for their facilitation process. And then if the remaining 10,000 is going to be used for implementation, you can just put that. You can just say implementation of housing report outcome, 10,000, and we understand that that will be coming later. Media support material, this includes letters of support and any kind of additional documentation. So I mentioned earlier that if there was some documents that didn't fall into any of the categories as far as existing documentation, you can put it here. That would be another good option. Also, if there are any, say, articles or any maybe existing housing information in your area that, again, you didn't think that fit anywhere else, you can put it here. Letters of support, if there are any organizations that are really excited about this housing, if there's any major industries that have recognized the need for housing, those are the type of entities that getting a letter of support would be really helpful to demonstrate that they are involved, interested, and part of this process moving forward. So I would look back at who you may be listed in your partnerships response and try to get a letter of support from them to indicate that, yes, they really are on board with this. And finally, the last scored section is grantmanship and case for support. Obviously, there's not a question that goes to this. This is just an opportunity for the review panel to just look holistically at the application and determine if it really is meriting investment from the state. Okay, so that is the end of the application review. We got a couple questions. So as far as sort of services, would an outside contractor be reference provide? I talked about this, I think I answered this kind of without even meaning to. But in the past, I think we've only had maybe 2 grantees who have utilized an outside contractor before. And it was primarily to help with capacity as far as they were the actual kind of grant manager. So they helped grant and project, I would say. So they did everything from the reporting of the grant to us, as well as they were the main facilitator with ISU Extension and Outreach. They helped to organize the meetings. They helped to kind of compile additional information. And that was kind of our initial intent is when we were talking to some key partners, for example, Council of Governments, it was the understanding that there is some information that might not be available on the Iowa Profile Tool. So the ability for a community to utilize these funds to hire another entity to compile that additional information might be useful. So that is a potential use of the grant funds. So can an application being submitted by a local nonprofit Economic Development Corp. on behalf of the city under the local EDA's Iowa grants.gov account. Okay. The application can be submitted by another entity, but the contract would need to be with the city, if that makes sense. And it's okay for the kind of primary contact to be another entity, but the authorized official would need to be the city, and the funds would run through the city as far as who would receive the reimbursement claims. And Melissa, yes, this is being recorded and the link will be posted on our website. And the guidelines, which pretty much I just read pieces of the guidelines with some little extra tidbits in there. Those are available already on the website, but this link with a recording should be available next week. Does anyone else have any other questions? You're welcome to drop them in the chat or unmute yourself. Okay. Well, again, thank you so much for joining. We will be posting this recording. If you have any questions about the grant application, please contact me. If you have any questions about the ISU extension and outreach, I highly recommend reaching out to them. Their information is on their website, which I could probably get back to their website as well. But they would be able to kind of walk you through. And again, you can email me and I can connect you with the best people there too. But really looking forward to your applications. Happy to answer any follow-up that we have after this webinar. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.